Hey everybody, welcome back to another video here. In this video we're going to look at doing some weld-ins, I also call them tie-ins, so that parts of your project don't fall out after it's been cut. I've gone ahead and I've already put a few images together here, and we're going to put them together into a single project. I have this weird little bow tie with a Mustang in it, kind of ironic. And then if you remember that tractor, the Smiths, I took off the tractor, took out the Smiths, so I had that shape. And then I just added in this text, which I've already converted to graphics. I've gone and made a path in each of these objects already, so they are like individual objects. If I hit Alt S, you can see that's what they're looking like. And as I've mentioned before, I just like to do that so that when I put them together, it just goes better. So I'm going to start just by laying them out. So I'm going to center here. I'm going to click on this guy. Let's zoom out so that goes faster. There we go. So I've got two separate objects here. I have that bow tie, and the bow tie I want to attach to this. Let me finish what I was doing here. I'm going to go this guy here. We're going to center it. And I'm just going to eyeball it. You'll spend more time getting this perfect. There, I'm happy with that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put those words into that sign. So just Control H. There, now it says proper. So I've got two separate entities. I could do a connection with some welding pieces. With something like this, I prefer just to overlay them a little bit. And this only works if you've already made a path in this object and the object that's receiving it. Okay, so I have a path in both of these, so right now they are technically two separate pieces. That didn't look like it, but technically two separate pieces. So I just need those two pieces to overlap each other just a tiny bit, like what you see right there. Now I can take those, and I'm going to go over to the weld tool over here. Pretty much the only weld tool I ever work with is this basic weld. The and weld and the XOR weld, I don't even mess around with them. You'll have to watch some other videos for that one here. I just use basic weld. So I hit that, and what that does, you'll see how that piece in between disappeared, and now those are all one object. Okay, so we might be thinking that we are ready to go ahead and cut this thing out, but the truth is we aren't. In fact, I'm going to just go and break my path to illustrate this to you better. Alright, so if we went and cut this out, what would happen is everything, I'm going to make a path again for you, sorry about this. Everything that is not attached to the main part of the object. So the main part of the object is this sign part with the bow tie here. Anything that doesn't have a connection to that is going to fall out. So the inside of the legs here, that's gone. Center of the P, the R, the O, the P, the R, all gone. And that's why I use proper, because it's going to help me illustrate what I'm trying to do here. Doesn't make sense for the sign, but it tells you, it's going to help you understand this better. Okay, so what I did here is I'm going to break the path, and I'm just going to show you what it's going to look like. So it'd be like this is gone, this is gone, 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 and gone. There you go. Alright, so the object you see now, that is what it's going to look like after it's cut. And that looks terrible. In some cases you might get away with that. The majority of the time that's not going to be acceptable. So I'm just going to undo all of that. Bring it all back. There we go. Okay, so we got to make those objects tie in so that they don't fall off. And you're going to have to get creative, try different things, see what, again, use some artistic expression here to make this work. This horse I've messed around with before. There's two ways of doing it. I need to be able to get that part to stay in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little rectangle. You saw me grab that just from the shapes category here. And to make life easy on myself, I'm going to put a little bit of curve on it. So just hit the arrow. That's going to set it. Not curve, I'm going to arch it. There's my arch. So I'm going to throw that in there. When I first started doing this, what I used to do was try to get my corners to line up perfect like that. Um, and I would spend a lot of time wasting my time trying to get that to be perfect. I then figured out a strategy of using nodes instead to fix that. So now I don't worry about that. All I do is I just make sure I am connecting the two pieces I want to connect, and I will fix it later on. So take that object's in place there. I could use the exact same object and just duplicate it, or I can go ahead and make another one with this by making a new box and putting it in position. Like I said, this horse, there's no way to make this horse perfect. I have learned that. You just got to find what looks the best for you, what you're the most happy with. So I have those two pieces in place, right? So that's connecting this to the main plate, that's connecting this to the main plate, and I'm going to start just with welding that in. So I'm going to select everything here. I'm going to go weld and do that basic weld. As you can see, those parts disappeared, but it looks a little bit goofy. So again, this is where our node editing comes in. I can come in here. You see how much quicker this is than sitting there and messing around with trying to get that square to be perfect where I wanted it to be. And same thing here, we could just blend that in. There we go. So as you can see, it's not awesome. I don't even like how that's coming in there, but it almost makes that look like its own separate legs. They're doing weird things there. So you have to play around and mess with it until you get it to look the way you want. And some things are just, you just have to live with them. They're just going to look weird. That's how it goes. Okay, I'm going to make a path there again. And we're going to tackle these letters. Same sort of strategy you want to use here. So what I'm going to do, I have a path made. As we can see, everything is together. Let's get our little bar here. When I do letters, I usually try to make them the same. So this is where I will use a duplicate. And I duplicate it before I put the angle and stuff on it because it gets difficult afterwards. So I'm just going to go Control D. I've got one for that R. I'm going to go Control D. I've got one for that O. Control D. There's a P. I'm going to, actually, you know what? I'm going to show you some other strategies for those two. Alright, so now I can take this one and put some bend on it. And you know what I'm going to do? Yeah, I've got another thing I'm going to show you. Okay, I'm going to start just by putting some bend on this here, and it's not going real good because of the type of text that this is. There we go. So it's not going to work out real good with this text, and sometimes you can battle with it, and I'll show you how we're going to fix that up and try to make it look better later on. If you could do a smaller one like this, it's going to work a little bit better. Trouble is, depending on the size of your project, that might be too small to actually hold anything in. The plasma cutter can't cut quite that accurate, and that part's going to fall out anyways because this piece here is going to get too thin. But we'll look at that here. So this one needs a stretch. I'm going to duplicate that for a test over there too. Okay, so as you can see, I like to do 2 tie-ins for my letters. I have seen lots of people just put a single one in there, and it works. I like to make sure it's not going to fall out or have any problems. But what I mean by a single one, I'll show you with this one right here. And we'll work on that one. That's one way we could do it. Another way would be bringing it from the bottom, but okay, so I've got my bars in there. I'm going to highlight everything and I'm going to weld them in place. Again, just a basic weld, and we can look at how that looks. Alright, so there's how it's looking right now. That P looks, as we said, we expected that to look a little bit goofy. So if I was actually using this font, the customer absolutely required that I use this font, this is what I'd probably do. I'd probably just put something in there just to kind of expose and show that that is indeed a P. so that I could still see it looks a little bit better than it does. It makes it a little bit more P-ish. And we can go ahead and make that even more obvious that that's a P. Still looks a little bit goofy, but some fonts just aren't great to work with. But if your customer, if that's what they want, then they're going to have to live with how it looks. And that's why we do samples. And while we're talking about customers and projects and text specifically, do not give your customer free range of any text. What I like to do is just give them a couple ideas. Here's a 2 or 3 different fonts. Which one do you prefer? Oh, I like this one. Perfect. Go with it. When you open up the entire catalog of fonts, you are in for just frustration. People take forever to pick fonts and it's still not right at the end. So limit the amount of options you give to people for fonts. So this R, I'd do the same thing. I'd take that out there. I'd probably leave that little dip in right there, because that actually doesn't look too bad. I might move it over so it's in line with. I kind of don't really like that, to tell you the truth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all of those. I'm going to take those two, and I'm just going to use my keyboard, pop them over. Yeah, even that one I don't like. Let's get rid of all of them. There. And again, that R does that weird thing there. We could sit here and we could fix all that up a bit more if we weren't totally happy with it. Add a little bit more arch into it. There. The O is actually, it's pretty good. I myself, I don't like how these don't line up. So I'd probably drag one down here. Get rid of a few of these so that we can actually show that a little bit. That needs one more down there. Okay, and at the top, I don't know if it had the same problem. It's close enough for right now for what we're doing. Okay, so this is what I meant by just doing a single piece up here. Instead of doing multiple pieces, you just do one. And by doing one, you have to bring all these up so that lined up going across like that. Oh geez. Okay, just about there. I don't know, let's take a look at it right now. You could do that from the top like what I just did. You could also go and do that from the bottom. Again, that P I'd want to extenuate a little bit. Instead of putting the tie-in up here, you could put the tie-in down there. It'd do the exact same thing. That's one option. Now the other thing you can do is you sit here and you do a ton of work on a letter like that already, and then you've got the exact same letter to deal with over here. What I usually do is if I have any repeats of letters, I'll just break my path. I'll grab my letter that's done already, and I'm going to duplicate that, Control D. I'm going to haul it over here, and then I'm going to try and line it up. And when I line it up again, you zoom in. You can move things more accurately and just use your keyboard. The more you zoom in, the more accurate you can get your stuff. There, that's pretty accurate. No one's going to see the difference there. And now what I would do is I would come back here and I would just select the one that I wanted to get rid of. So there was the center of it. There's the outline of it. Boom. I don't have to go through all that work of welding in and tying in all over again. I'd want to make sure I make a path again, Control H, and there it is. So now when you went and cut this out, as you can see, anything that was floating now is tied into this outer plate here, and the center of that P is going to stay, the center of the O, the center of the R, the P and the other R, everything's going to stay there, and you are ready to go and do a cut on that. One thing I would One more thing I want to mention before we start looking at making cut paths, because cut paths isn't a long video here, that's why I'm going to throw it in with this one here, is making sure that your tie-ins are big enough. So for example, on this sign, we look at this here, we can see these small sections there. Let's Alt S, let's grab something like this, and I'm just going to take it and measure. So just using that box to measure, and by measuring with that box, I can see that I am 1/10 of an inch. So that is tiny. It is very unlikely that the machine's going to cut that out nice. So what I would do if I was, because what will happen is that when it cuts out this piece and it cuts out that piece, it just makes that edge hot, and they'll usually bleed together on the machine, and then a few of these might stick around. Smaller ones like this probably are going to fall apart though, and you'll be left with just a hollow space. So that doesn't look good. So if you're going to cut a really big sign like this one, where you're going to be putting a lot of money into the steel, I would do a test cut on just the one piece first. So what I mean by that is I would break the path. That is not what I wanted. Control J, not Control K. Break the path. I would take out that object, and that's going to grab that circle for me too. Let's get rid of that. I'd take that object now, and I would just put this into a separate plate, and I would cut this out as an individual thing, just as is. It might be a waste of steel, but you're more likely to have a little hunk of steel that's 10 inches by 20 that you could waste, rather than something that was 60 by 40. That'd be much better to waste that small little scrap you have laying around that's 20 inch by 10. And let's say it didn't work out. What you'd want to do is go and modify all of those. So yeah, this is tedious with things like this. You expand them. So I would grab that one and I'd stretch them out. I'd grab this piece and I'd stretch it out. I'd grab this piece. You pretty much remake this entire thing. Grab that one, stretch it out, and etc., 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 until all the object. Maybe I didn't want to mess with the bottom too much. Well, I could grab a few of those. Let's pull them all up like this, and let's pull those too. Oh, there we are. We can pull those up away from here. Mess around with your keyboard. Do whatever you got to do to make it so that they're going to look decent and still have enough metal in between that they're going to stay together. What's the right amount? Well, that's basically just dependent on the thickness of steel you use, as well as your consumables. If your consumables aren't in great shape, it's not going to cut as accurate. If you have brand new consumables in, it'll do a better job, and it will be able to hold those lines a little better for you. So this one I'd probably just shrink it down, and yeah, do any modifications. Again, this is where the cost to your customer really comes in. And where you can really make money quick is if you have good objects to work with right from the get-go, ones that you don't have to sit here and remake from scratch. Okay, so that pretty much covers all of our tie-ins so that things don't fall out. And all that's left then is we want to take this object and we want to cut it out. So we're going to have to make ourselves a toolpath. I'm going to get rid of that thing there. Make ourselves a toolpath out of this. You would select the object and you go over here to toolpaths, and we really have three options here. We have online, we have male, and we have female. Now it depends on what you want here. So if I highlight this and I go, male would probably be the one I would want to use for this. So what male does is it goes inside the open areas and works its way to the outer edge and then cuts. So what you're left with is that the outline of it is going to be the exact size that you have made it. So if you're making parts that have to be a very specific measurement, they need a very specific size hole, that is how you'd want to do it, is with the male cut path. The downside to a male cut path is some people want to keep the outer edge and the inside edge for both, and when they do that, you're um, you're you're not going to be able to do that if you run a male toolpath, because as you can see, it starts its cut inside the plate, so this piece of the P is going to have this notch cut out of it. That part is going to have its notch cut out of it. All these things are going to have a little bit of damage to them, and so if they want to keep both the outer and the inner, you don't want to use a male cut path. This object, I would want to probably use a male cut path, because I would want it to look exact like this when it's done. So my other option here would be online. So if I take my online toolpath, what that does for me is it just follows that exact line. So it starts its cut right on the lines that are drawn, and it goes around and it cuts. And this is going to give you a good outline, and it's going to give you a good inside. The downside to doing this, like why wouldn't you do that all the time? A, it's not going to be cut to very exact specific measurements that you wanted. It's going to be pretty darn close. It's just the width of the cutter here that's going to be off by. But number two, when it pierces, so when the machine comes down and it starts its cut, it pierces, which usually leaves a hole larger than the line the kerf that it leaves when it cuts. So there's going to be a little bit of a notch in this piece, a tiny little notch and tiny little notch in that, and that's going to happen on every single spot that the machine goes up and cuts, and some customers aren't going to want that. So if they want to keep both pieces, they can, but the trade-off is you lose. You're going to have those little notches in there, which aren't the best. Okay, and then the last one is a female cut path. So what female cut path does is it cuts from the outside. So let's say it doesn't really make sense for this object. Let's say I just wanted the letters though, and that's all I cared about. Or maybe I just wanted that horse cut out, and I want to be able to take the letters and screw them onto a wooden board or something like that. Take the horse, weld it onto a custom-made grill, whatever. When you do female, it follows the outside of the part that was getting cut out. So it's going to be cutting here. It's going to follow the outline, and what it's going to leave is a perfect untouched section of that P. Perfect untouched section of that P. Now if I was doing a female cut path, it would not make sense for me to do it with these tie-ins here. Okay, so let's just show you what I mean by that. So you can see, let's just remove them. There we go, and I'm going to grab it and I'm going to type proper again. There we go. I'm going to quickly turn that to graphics, make it bigger. We're not going to get too carried away with getting it perfect here. I'll just make it bigger, and I'm going to go Control H, make a path. I'm going to make a path. There we go. Okay, so now when I go and do my female cut path on that, you can see what we're going to get. You're going to be left with like a nice P. Okay, it's not going to be it's not going to be multiple parts like this, which doesn't make sense to have those multiple parts if you want the full letter. And actually in reality it's even better to take that. I wouldn't even put it on a plate. I would just go like that, make a path. This will help you understand it better. Make my female path there. There. So this is what you're left with. This nice P. Yeah, that's pretty much what you'd be looking for if you're going to do female. So you have to decide what the customer wants, what you want to do with yours, and just make it happen. But in reality, all you're doing is you're highlighting it. I'm going to go back. You've got your project all made. Take it, we put our toolpath on it that we want. There's my toolpath, and then I always like to go and move it to the bottom left corner, and I always put this little bit extra on there. Let me turn my number lock on. There we go. And you notice I don't go 0, 0, 0. I go 0, 1. It's just habit to do that. But move it down to the bottom left corner. That way when you put it to your machine, you'll know what corner to index it from. Maybe you want to index it from the center. I usually index from the bottom left corner, and then I line up the torch right over here with the bottom left corner of the sheet. Then it goes, cuts it out, and it's good to go. Because one problem you are going to find is if I went and moved this first. Okay, there we go. I'm going to move this to that bottom corner. We're just going to go zeros. And we're going to go 0. There. And now I decide I'm going to do a cut path on it. I'm going to go male cut path. Great. Now, see how I'm set at 0? When I highlight this object, now it's at a -6 because that cut path actually goes beyond 0. And when you go to put this into the machine, it's not going to understand because it doesn't understand negative cutting space. And so it's not going to work. It's not even going to let you transfer this into the G code that the machine understands. Which is why if you put your cut path on before you do that, it's going to work much better. But if you have a problem where it's not, you don't understand why it's not converting it to G code, double check that you don't have a negative number there. And that's usually caused by putting it there before your cut, because your cut adds to your actual size. Okay, so technically I'm at 0 all the way around. I have all my tie-ins done. I have a cut path. I can now take this to someone who has the proper program, because remember, I'm just working on the free program. The master program, you'll take the object, go transform, and you'll output it, and it'll convert it then into a G code that you'd then take that USB stick with the file on it, go to your machine, plug it in, and it'll start cutting it out. You now have a completed project. Congratulations. I hope all that was beneficial to you. From beginning to end, how to make a project. I covered probably 90% of the stuff you'll encounter if you're doing this for a long time. If you're just doing simple little projects, for sure I covered what you needed to know. If you're really getting into this and doing lots of custom projects, there's going to be some other aspects that you're going to want to mess around with, and things like your chopping tool. So this object doesn't fit. I don't have a path on it anymore. So what I would do, like my machine's not big enough to make that. So what I'd want to do then is chop the object into 2 different pieces, and then what will happen is that you'll be able to split it into 2 separate entities. There's one, so that would cut out as one on one plate. This would cut out as another, and then when you'd go back and you'd want to weld that all together after the fact. And anyways, stuff like that you're going to encounter. There's lots of videos on very specific things. That's great. Lots of videos on very specific problems like that. But for general stuff, I think what we've covered should get you through most of the problems. And when you find an individual problem, what I do is just go back and work on it just as is. Just the individual issue, look it up on YouTube, find the answer, and you should be able to figure it out that way. And if there's no video yet, you're going to have to sit down and actually maybe hash something out yourself, get on some forums. You can even call Torchmate. They are fairly helpful. I haven't had to call them in quite a few years, but back when I was first learning all this, they were quite helpful, taking over my computer and showing me some problems and things I was doing wrong and stuff. So try them as well. Okay, I think that takes care of everything. good luck to you, and I guess let's see what you can produce. Send me some examples. If you make some objects and my videos helped you out, send me a message and show me what you did. I'd love to see what you're able to do with it. Okay, take care, everybody. Peace out.